right, so today we're going to talk about complex numbers. And remember, the imaginary number is the number I, which is the square root of -1. Well, complex numbers are basically numbers that include I in that term. So, when we're simplifying complex numbers, we simplify the real numbers together, we combine like terms, the real numbers together, and then the i's together, just like we did with radicals. We combine the real numbers, or I'm sorry, not the real numbers, the rational numbers together, and then any irrational numbers that are like terms, we can combine those together. So here we have 4, 3, and -4, so that gives us a 3. And then we have a -2i, a -3i, and a +7i, which leaves us with +2i. So our answer is 3 plus 2i. Now let's take a look at example number 2. Remember, when you're subtracting here, you need to distribute that. So our new problem is 3 minus 2i minus 2 plus 3i. And now we just combine our like terms. So we have 3 minus 2 is 1, and then -2i plus 3i is +i. And that's your answer. So now let's take a look at example number 3. We're going to multiply this just like we did when we multiplied two binomials. Okay, so 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times -2i is -4i. 5i times 3 is 15i. And 5i times -2i is -10i squared. Okay, well, we can combine these like terms, so we have 6 plus 11i. And then remember, I squared is -1, so this is -10 times -1, which is going to give us a +10. And then finally, 6 plus 10 is 16. So our answer is 16 plus 11i. Now let's take a look at example number 4. Again, we're treating this just like we did when we were working with polynomials. So we have our 3i out front, and then we're going to expand this 2i minus 1 quantity squared. So we have 2i times 2i gives us 4i squared. 2i times -1 is -2i. And then -1 times 2i is -2i. And -1 times -1 is +1. And remember, that's all being multiplied by the 3i. So now let's combine our like terms. Remember that I squared is the same thing as -1, so 4 times -1 is -4. Your -2i's combined to give you -4i. And then you have a +1. So that really becomes 3i times -4 plus 1 is -3 minus 4i. And then our last step is to distribute the 3i. So we have -9i minus 12i squared, which when you simplify the 12i squared, remember I squared is negative, so -1 times -12 gives you -9i plus 12. Remember, I squared is -1. So now let's take a look at example number 5. We can't have radicals in the denominator, so we're going to do the same thing we did with radicals. Remember, we're looking for a difference of squares, so we're going to multiply by 2 plus 4i. And remember, whatever you do to the denominator, you have to do to the numerator. So now it's a matter of multiplying through. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 4i is 16i. Negative 3i times 2 is negative 6i. And then negative 3i times 4i is negative 12i squared. Then we have 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 4i is 8i. Negative 4i times 2 is negative 8i. And then negative 4i times 4i is negative 16i squared. All right, so now let's simplify this sum. All right, so we have 8, and then our 16i and our negative 6i give us 10i. Remember that I squared is negative 1, so negative 1 times negative 12 is positive 12. Then we have 4 here. Our 8 i's are going to cancel. And then remember, I squared is negative 1, so negative 1 times negative 16 is positive 16. So now we're just going to combine. We have 8 plus 12 is 20, plus 10i over 20. Now we can simplify this just a little bit. Our greatest common factor of the numerator is 10. So that leaves us with 2 plus I over 10 times 2. So those are going to cancel, and you're left with 2 plus I all over 2. All right, let's take a look at the last one, number 6. Find the reciprocal of 4 plus I. Okay, well that should be easy, right? Because the reciprocal means you just put it over 1 and flip it. So we should be done, right? Except we're not, because what does I represent? I is the square root of negative 1, and we can't have a radical in the denominator, so we have to rationalize. And we're going to do it the same way we just did in example number 5. Remember, we're looking for the difference of squares. So we want to multiply by 4 minus I. And then whatever we do to the denominator, we have to do to the numerator. So that gives us 4 minus I in the numerator. 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times negative I is negative 4I. I times 4 is 4I. And then I times negative I is negative I squared. All right, so now let's simplify that a little bit. We have 4 minus I in the numerator. 16, our negative 4I and 4I cancel out. And then remember that I squared is negative 1, so negative 1 times negative is positive 1. So that gives us 4 minus I over 17. And that's the reciprocal of 4 plus I.